We're gonna keep our distance from each other today.
Well, that's good.
It's not an actual meeting here because,
Because I'm a vulnerable guy at my age,
I know.
And,
Since we don't have a quorum. Luckily, we weren't really asking you to vote on anything, we just wanted to have a discussion.
right.
So the two of you can still help us out designing stuff that we can bring for your meeting next time, whenever that might be.
April sometime, right?
I don't know, we'll keep you posted.
Okay.
Jeff, you wanna just pick up where we left off?
Yeah, so who's all there?
Patrick and Mike are here, Hal and Stacy are here. No Tim,
Okay.
no Michael Gary, no Michael McHugh.
Well, should I call the meeting to order for a special meeting?
There is no meeting,
There is no meeting, okay.
but we're still gonna video it. People can still watch your conversation, the two of you, and
Good.
Jeff, can you see us now?
No, so I was wondering about that. How do I do that?
Oh, yeah, you won't be able to see us if you're presenting, so, but if you bring that.
Yeah.
nothing to see here.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. That's okay. You want me to get started?
Yeah,
Yeah. So everything's crazy up there like everywhere else, I assume.
Crazy at the grocery stores.
Yeah. Yep. Weird situation, that's for sure.
Well, I'll just call
well-
the meeting to order for discussion of our project.
it's all yours, Jeff.
Oh, mine? Okay. So you can see the slide that says recap?
Yep.
Okay. So I just added a couple of slides to quickly recap what I came away with, I guess, for the lots, for houses, basically, before we dive into the other types of housing. So the standards we talked about were lot width. That's a key standard. It can be reduced. I feel like that's where we landed for sure, but it'll be a different standard by housing type. Lot depth,
Well, the minimum now is 10,000 square feet, and I told Mike that I would like to get it to 6,500 or 7 to
yeah,
enable
so,
a smaller,
Yeah.
cheaper property. We did give 2 conditional use permits on 8th Avenue, and they've worked out very good. The houses sold just like that. But that cut the price down, not only the sales price, but the heating and maintenance costs. And then there's another thing that I would like to get us to consider is that to get the PUC to authorize duplexes with 1 meter and fourplexes with 1 meter without having that cost for the rest of the units. I owned the building at 5th Avenue and we only had 1 line for 6 condominiums in that building. And it worked out fine. The people that are running the voting of the duplex or the fourplex, they can figure out how they want to take care of the water bill.
you said duplexes and what are there? What are the?
Fourplexes,
Fourplexes, okay.
or it
Or however
eventually,
many plexes.
eventually if we have
Yeah,
townhomes also.
yeah, yeah.
You see, the
So-
property, the Jones property, there, the guy was set to build townhouses there together, and the hookup charges, he complained about it, and he withdrew, and he's got the lot for sale for housing. So we do have at least 4 lots or 5, the Jones property.
Yeah.
So we have lots around the city that can be used.
Yeah, so the numbers we talked about, the next one on the list is lot area. I feel like we were saying that's not a key standard, but if you want to keep, if the city wants to keep it, which might make sense, then we calculate it based on the desired lot widths. And if we were talking about 40 being the minimum, and if you just multiply that by 135, which is a depth of a lot with an alley, that's more like 5,500 even. So that gets even smaller than what you just mentioned, Al.
Well, I would be in favor of that. I would be in favor of making it smaller to encourage cheaper housing.
Yeah, so the direction I think we've been going so far is people seem comfortable with 40-foot widths, and just based on that, it would be more like 5,500.
Yeah, that would be fine with me. In the city of Minneapolis, it's far less than that. There's only a 10-foot distance between houses in South Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, all over the city. I grew up in one of those bungalows, so I know
Yeah.
I could see what they were having for dinner, but it never caused any problems.
So
Yeah.
last time you said that the 40-foot lots, 40-foot wide
Yeah.
lots, you had about 30 small lots like that in Grand Marais. Do you know the number of 40-foot wide lots? I'm just, 40, 50?
Can you say that again?
It's really hard to calculate how many there could be.
No, how many are currently?
Oh, yeah.
I'm
I see what
driving
you're
around
talking
looking,
about.
is that a 30 or is that a 40? And
She's asking for the current count of small lots.
Yeah.
It was
I
on
think
the
we have
map.
it in here.
Yeah.
Aren't-
Yeah, we said about 30 of them. You see that on
Yep.
the top of this slide?
And do you know how many, like at 50 feet wide, we have?
I
Are you
I
saying
don't have
empty
those.
lots?
No.
or
don't have those calculated,
Actual
but there
houses?
are.
Oh, it's way
there
down
are
to,
some-
it's way down to 30 feet.
I
Oh.
know, but I'm asking the variety that we have in Grand Marais currently,
Yeah.
the numbers.
Yeah, so we can calculate that. There's, like you can see here, there's 30 at 40. There's a handful of smaller ones, less than 10 smaller than that, I think. And then there was some above that in the 50 range. And I don't think we have it calculated, but we can do that.
No, I was just curious.
Well, some of those, like
Yeah.
on 8th Avenue down there, they were bungalow cabins for rent, and then they converted them into houses. But they're very small. They can't be more than 25 feet wide.
Yeah, there are some down at that 25 and 30 foot range too.
I just made them move their cars, and they don't like me very well. But there was block.
That are currently out there, that are built on and we think are okay, and I was just wondering about numbers.
Yeah, we can easily do that and send that to you.
Well, we have the map that he showed us
Right.
last time. We have access to that now. People can see that if they want.
And I just wondered if we knew, because I looked at that map and I don't know the actual number. Somebody asked me
Yeah.
and I'm like, I don't know, I'll ask.
Yeah, we can, that's a quick summary we can do. And you should have the map there. I don't know if you have it in the room, but
We didn't.
we
bring
left that map with the lot lists at
Okay.
City Hall.
But we'll get it online, so.
Okay.
Well, you look at the
I guess
lots
so I
right
could go
across
around and
from the
count.
library. That's an example right there.
Well, I caution you not to try and and make people feel safe about these changes by saying we're already this way,
Yes.
because we're also going to be changing how some neighborhoods look.
Look, yes.
So it's both expect change and the change isn't so radical that we haven't already done it here.
Right.
It's got to be both. But
Right.
I'd lead with the expect change message, just to try to be open about this.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to try to make the claim that these regulations aren't really going to change anything, because that's,
No,
we're
they,
doing
right,
this
they
'cause we
will.
want to.
We need to
Yeah.
change, yes, I agree.
Okay. Well, should we skip ahead
Yeah,
to?
so,
Should we
so
skip?
if we did supply a summary, it would, probably the simplest one would be to take the smallest lots we've had on a map for a while now and just say this many by 30, this many, or 30 feet wide, this many 40 feet wide, this many 50 feet wide. I mean, we could do that. It wouldn't be every lot in the city though. Because we don't have that data. We actually have to measure every lot too.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to put a lot more
No. I
effort
don't-
into creating a table like that. I mean, that you've counted 30 40-foot lots, I think makes Stacy's point already. So, let's just leave it
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah.
So just to finish this slide, so lot depth, we're saying it's not a key standard. It's typically determined by the block width, which is generally 280 feet wide. So typically it's 135 or 140 feet. We talked about last time that we could reduce the minimum from what it is now, which is 120, which doesn't matter unless you're on one of those end of the block lots. And those, a lot of those are 100 feet. So we could reduce the minimum to 100 feet just so that those lots are conforming. And if people are able to plat additional lots at that 100 feet on the end of blocks, that would be supported by the code then. Lot coverage then, we did some measurement of that. It's not a constraining standard today, which I expected it would be, but that previous slide that we went to, we found less than a handful of lots that are at 30% or more lot coverage today, even on the smallest lots.
Well, the reason behind this is to encourage lower priced housing.
Right.
The smaller the house, the cheaper it is to operate with heat and water and financing. The problem is with getting low income, the HUD standard is from $90,000 to $140,000, and we're not in that category very often. Even the one roof housings on Second Street are not qualified for low income, moderate income housing. And we're working on trying to get a grant from the EDA to lower that cost. And we do have a fund in there for that, and I believe we're gonna do that.
Yeah, and I think as Mike explained at the last meeting, we're trying to reduce the barriers in the city's regulations, but we can't address all those things with the regulations.
That's correct.
So then setbacks, and this is my understanding from the last meeting, but the front or the street setback, I feel like that sounded like that is a key standard yet, but people felt, or commissioners felt like it could be reduced below 25 feet. And we talked about the potential for basing it on the setbacks of existing houses on the block, as long as that doesn't get too complex. So we'll take a look at that. The setback the back or the rear setback, feels like that's not a key standard because it's typically really set by the block depth or dimension. So I don't know if we landed anywhere with that. I think we talked about maybe you could reduce it. It's at 25 feet, so I don't know. I kind of feel like if you kept it at 25 feet, that might be okay too. I don't know if we want to link it to the depth of a parking stall, which in your code today is 20 feet, I think.
Well, some of the lots we have, people have trouble with that regulation by building a garage. So that has come up many times.
Oh,
They come in and they want a special conditional use for it, and I think we've given them quite a few of them. Sporn's lot, Mike, that garage is over the line a little bit, but we allowed it.
that's a good point. I don't have the accessory structure setback in my,
I've been around
And
here
is it-
so long that I think I know the history of Grand Marais pretty well. And we are a little different than normal communities. Our traffic flow pattern is not good at all. So those are things we should be looking at also.
Mike, do you know offhand, does an accessory structure have a smaller setback than
Yeah.
25?
Yes.
If, under certain circumstances, it does. We can talk about that as we're developing the draft ordinance language.
Yeah, okay. And then the next one's the side setback, which I feel like that is a key standard. It's so connected to the lot width that we're trying to change. So that could be reduced, especially if an alley is present or accessible or improved. And then the last one we talked about was building width. Likely a barrier to manufactured houses, tiny houses, and courtyard houses. It's currently 17 feet. A lot of codes don't have building width as a minimum requirement. And we've talked about that one could be eliminated.
That should be very considered. The hospital, I'm working with Kimber Ralsted about a plan to put some manufacturing mobile homes on the property where they could walk to work. And the cost would be far less than a conventional building for workforce
Right.
housing.
So the next step, where we landed last time when Mike said we need more time to talk about this, was this slide. So these are the multi-unit housing types that we've been talking about, or residential building types. So going through we have 8 standards across the top there. I don't feel like we have to talk about all of them, each of them for each of the housing types. So as we go across, I think we need to talk about lot width in depth, lot depth a little bit, lot area. I feel like it's really a calculation of lot width and depth, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on what's the right number there. We'll just calculate that. And we can, the code can continue to have a minimum lot area, but it's just going to be a calculator from what the minimum lot width and depth is that we land on. The lot coverage percent, I feel like the 30% isn't constraining, so the next step is to do some examples of these housing types on lots, or a demonstration or a typical lot in Grand Marais, and we can look at it then and just see if we think lot coverage is going to be a challenge for some of the new housing types that are identified in the code. So we're not talking about that tonight or this afternoon, but at the next meeting. Street yard setback, I think for all housing types, it could, potentially could be the same across all housing types, in that it can be smaller than 25 feet, whatever number we land on, and it should reflect existing, setbacks of existing houses or buildings on that block. So I don't feel like we have to, I guess I'm not recommending that we talk about front or street yard setback by housing type today. Side yard setback, I think we should talk about across each housing type. Rear yard setback, I think we don't have to, that it's at 25 feet, and we look at what garages, what the right number is for that in the new code. And then building width, we've decided to eliminate. So hopefully not to oversimplify it, it seems like we just want to talk about lot width and side yard setback, and then lot depth a little bit for each of these housing types.
Sounds
Does
good.
that make sense so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
So for a duplex, let's just start with lot width. For a duplex, really that housing type should be really similar to a house, the scale of a house. So that's why the side yard setback could be the same. And the lot width, I mean, it is 2 units, but it could be, they could be up and down. So, you know, in that case, the building doesn't have to be any wider or much wider, and the lot wouldn't need to be much wider. So what I'm recommending here is that instead of 40 feet being the minimum, maybe we land on, it should be 45 feet or 50 feet. And at a minimum, that would be to, at the bottom, I say, you know, that'd be an extra lot width to accommodate driveway access to the rear of the lot, trash storage, or internal building circulation. So even if it's an up-down situation, you know, it could be a little bit wider because you'd have that entry and that stairway up to the upper unit. So that's why we got to 45 or 50 there. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Or any questions about that?
yes.
Okay,
Well, I want Mike's opinion. He's got to deal with all this stuff, so I value his input.
I appreciate that, Hal. I'll write it down for you for next time.
I missed that comment, what was it?
I'll write it down for next time. I think my opinion's gonna be carried through with your recommendation, Jeff.
Okay. So multiplex small, and, you know, before we get to the end, we can call this housing type something else. Multiplex can be kind of a, I don't know, intimidating term maybe, but we've defined it earlier as, you know, it's bigger than a duplex, and we've said it's 3 to 6 units, so it's, you know, up to 6 units. Looking at other cities, the buildings can, you know, still be relatively similar to the scale of a big house, basically. And, you know, so, you know, it might be just 3 units instead of 2, so a triplex, or it could be a fourplex. So a little bit bigger, and so the lot width would go up, you know, some number, and I don't know if there's gonna be a magic number. I think we just have to, we'll recommend it, and then you guys can, you know, either support it or question it, but, you know, in that 50 to 55 range. And then basically that's relating to the side yard setback. So if there's an alley that's, you know, if there's an alley, number one, platted, but if it's also usable and or improved, then the side setbacks could be at that 5 foot on each side, just like we talked about for the house, a house or a duplex. But if there isn't an alley, maybe that side setback should be 10 feet because, you know, if you're going up to 3 or 6 units, you probably want a driveway to the back for parking.
The common situation in Minneapolis and St. Paul are 10 feet for all structures.
Yeah, so I did look at that today. I don't have it right in front of me, but I think Minneapolis today has smaller, they go down to 5 or 6 feet for the smallest lot widths, and then they gravitate up to 10 feet like you're saying. I think that's where they're at today.
Yes,
And then,
that encourages,
St.
like townhomes with universal walls. That's very popular because it lowers the cost of the upkeep and everything else and consolidates units in housing. Like I said earlier, we had one developer that wanted to develop the Joins property, and he was told he had to have hookups for every unit, and he got the cost, and he said, I'm not going to do it because of that reason. So we chased him away.
and we looked at St. Paul as well. You brought that up. So St. Paul, they have these, their T districts, which stands for traditional neighborhood district, zoning districts, and they go down to the 5 foot. They actually say, if you read it, I think it says, no side yard setback except for what's required by the building code or something like that, which ends up being 5 feet, I think. So we have seen 5 foot setbacks in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and some other cities. So right now the recommendation is that for, you know, 1 unit detached houses, Grand Marais, we feel like could consider a 5 foot setback on each side. And what I'm saying with the multiplex, the small, that second one there is that when you're getting up to 3 and 6 units, 3 to 6 units, you may want to plan on, there should be the city may want to have a driveway that gets them to the parking in the rear of the building, because I know parking's allowed in the front yard today, but that's what we'd recommend. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I feel positive about it.
Okay. So that, so we, you know, if there's support for that, we can work with staff on how we handle the alley situation, if that's called out in the code specifically, so that if there's an alley present, that setbacks are smaller. I don't know if, Mike, that's what you were thinking of, but that would be one way to do it.
Yeah.
The multiplex large, so that's 7 to, I think, 18 units. So it's still one building, you know, shared entrance. It's not getting at row houses yet. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But it's a larger number of units, but could still be, you know, it doesn't have to be a huge building, not like an apartment building necessarily. So that goes up, and we have the lot width going up for that to about 75 feet. And then similar, if there's an alley, there, you know, may not need to be a bigger side yard setback if there's an alley. But if there's not an alley, then maybe go up to the 10 or 15 foot side yard setback. And then courtyard apartments, so that's, you know, what people think of as an apartment building. The minimum lot width would be 100 feet. And then, oh, I know, I'm sorry, back to the multiplex large, part of the reason we land on the 75 foot is that allows a lot of current lots to be able to, if they would redevelop, they could build one of these types of housing on them. And you have a lot of 75 foot wide lots today. Let's see, courtyard apartments, 100 foot wide, and similar approach to the side yard setback for minimums. And then the last thing on this slide is the lot depth. It's not a big factor, we don't feel like, but the duplex and the small multiplex, we feel like that could be at 100 feet. So those, if there's lots on on the ends of the blocks, they could be built on or redeveloped on with duplexes or up to 6 units. And then we'll test that out when we do the typical sites. But then when you get up to the larger multiplex in the courtyard, we feel like the minimum, should be 135, that they should be able to fit on your blocks where lots are typically facing east-west, but that they would probably overwhelm the 100-foot depth. And that lines up with what we've seen in other cities where we've seen this 100-foot and 140-foot minimum depths for smaller versus larger housing types.
So we talked before about the setbacks being combined, 5 to 10 feet for the house. Are we
Right.
talking the same combination here for these structures or not?
We could, if you
No,
like that
because
idea, we definitely
I don't
could.
like that idea, but I'm just wondering where we're going.
Yeah, I think we're talking about for the bigger buildings, having the regular setback be required.
Okay,
Rather than
I feel
some
more
flexibility.
comfortable with that.
Yeah. The smaller buildings still, even maybe the multiplex small, but for sure the duplexes,
Yeah,
we'll probably treat the same as a single-family home. So whichever way we decide to deal with single-family
Okay.
homes. It just has to do with how much space is reasonably required to get to the backyard. And maybe that's none because there's an alley. And how much space is reasonably required to provide separation between buildings. And how much is reasonably required to do maintenance on buildings. And so we're going to keep it as small as we think we can, but for these bigger buildings, it still needs to be.
yeah, I think it's important to,
Yeah, but this is
No.
still, think about the setbacks that are in our R2 zone right now are 40 feet in the front and 25 on the sides. So that is a failed experiment in telling people how big those setbacks need to be because no one built anything using those rules for their entirety of their existence. So
Right.
we do have to make them smaller than that, but not necessarily, smaller than our existing residential setbacks.
okay.
It's okay, I'll go to the next slide and then we can talk about all of them.
Yeah.
So on this slide, we have the row houses, so the small row house versus the large row house, small being up to 4, so 2 to 4 row houses, which have no setbacks. So Hal, as you've been talking about in a couple of your points, that these would be attached, so the side yard setback just goes away, except on the edges of those, multi-unit row house buildings. Large row houses, 5 to 8 units, I believe. And so we're saying that the lot width, what we've seen is that row houses, the minimum we've seen is that they be 18 feet. So we could go with that 18 feet unless there's discomfort with that, but I think that's a safe number for a minimum. And then, so that wouldn't change. The only thing that's different between small and large is the number of units, not the size of each unit.
Keep in
And-
mind that on the top of, without mentioning names, that people that have contacted me about planned unit developments and townhouses, and I'm sure that if we make the ordinances more accommodating, I'm sure they would proceed with it.
Say that again, please?
Because there's a lot of people up on top of the hill off of Highway 61 that someday I think they've expressed an interest in developing that property into townhomes
Yeah,
or the units that you're talking about.
yeah. So I mean, you have a couple, at least in building type, you have a couple of examples. Is that right, Mike? You have the lodging down on the water, right? That's built like a row house, right?
Right.
And then you have the ones, those are row houses just above 61 also, aren't they?
There's a couple of mobile homes that were put in there, and then some of them were moved to help IGA Foods have housing for their employees.
Yeah, I don't know of any other row houses. I can't think of any.
No, there isn't any.
It's just the ones right in the water?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Um,
the distinction here you're drawing with this definition is that these are separately owned pieces of property. They're gonna build
Right.
one building with 6 row houses, and each unit's gonna have its own yard, its own building, its own title, they own it. That's the idea? Whereas a
Yes.
6-unit multiplex is one piece of property with 6 rental units on it in one building.
That's right.
So getting back to Hal's question earlier about hookups, I think we can see one hookup for the multiplexes, whether it be 2 units or 8 units or 12 units. They can share a water meter and an electric meter and figure out how to divvy up the bill, because it's one piece of property and it can't be subdivided really. Whereas the row houses are all separately owned pieces of property. They're gonna need their own separate utility connections, each and every one of them.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if that makes them a poor choice for us, because especially for infill development, if you're taking a 200-foot wide or 150-foot wide piece of property, that's half a block, and you've got 20-foot lots on it, you're basically gonna have to dig up half the street to get all those utility connections in.
With a row house situation?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
somebody would be willing to do that. It might be economically viable when you've got that many units to put that kind of infrastructure in. But when Hal talks about the guy that didn't want to pay for utilities, that was the issue, is
Yeah.
there's 150
Yeah.
feet of street that's basically gonna have to be dug up.
Yeah, so I guess it would be, yeah, it does seem like it'd be at least more expensive from that standpoint. I mean, it's a different market too, where, row house, clearly somebody is able to own their own unit, and they have their own individual outdoor space,
Yeah. Well,
and you have a separate entry.
I think
Whereas-
maybe this is a part of the market we're not really going to get into. When we look at potential housing builders, they've almost always wanted to build things that are owned individually so that they can get out of it as quickly as possible and get their money back. But none of them are that interested in investing in utilities, and you're going to have to do the separately owned market. So it's probably not where we're going to see a lot of activity, even if we change the rules. It's going to be in the smaller 2-3 unit area where I think we'll see more infill. I don't expect to see a large row house, maybe ever. But certainly not infill. It would have to be somewhere where there's not existing utilities already.
Okay.
So
So as far
don't worry about
as far
it
as
too much.
what's that?
Maybe we don't have to worry about those rules as much.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be an option, but maybe maybe the market wouldn't be there. As far as side yard setbacks, what's recommended is 10 to 15 feet on the sides of the building. So similar to the multiplexes, that there is a little bit more space on the sides, but you gain the density by having 0 setbacks in between the actual units. And then the live-work housing type that we've been talking about, the idea is that it's basically the same type of a building as a row house, except that it allows a non-residential use in the same building. So it's, some kind of, service business or studio or, something that's not intensive as far as customers, where somebody can work and live, so that cuts down on their cost if they can have that in the same unit. And we feel like that, it would be the same scale as a house basically, because it's detached, whereas row houses are attached.
Are we going to talk about what kind of work? Because I can see that being an issue.
Well, we've allowed that type of mixing with home-based businesses only. That's been it's a conditional use right now in the residential zones, home occupation. And so we have a definition about what that means, and it particularly excludes certain things. When folks have made those applications, it's always been a conversation. So I don't know if that's something that we want to not be conditional use. Because I think that there's so much individuality in how somebody's going to run a business, and we're always concerned about what's your potential for how many customers at a time and hours of operation, and what are your parking availability and signage and noise and everything else.
There's a bill now in the legislature sponsored by Senator Bach that allows vacation rentals under a short-term basis to clarify a lot of the issues that the county has to deal with.
But that won't apply to Grand Marais because we're different. That's only a Cook County outside city limits.
Yes.
Well, that just has to do with tax classification, right?
But-
So it doesn't
but
have
it-
anything to do with zoning.
But it kind of
But
overlays because of inconsistency. There's a shortage in this town definitely of rental properties.
Right. Year-round rental properties.
Well,
Yeah.
and short-term properties are going to be allowed, I believe, as a result of this bill.
not in Grand Marais though.
Not in Grand Marais, Cook County.
Okay. So, yeah, so this, if this housing type is allowed in the residential zoning district is what we're talking about. It would say that the types of uses that are appropriate for the work in the neighborhood like that, they would definitely be identified. They would be probably really close to what your home occupation uses are. I don't know if it's something that you've seen interest in from anybody as far as new
From
housing
time to
types,
time,
but
yeah.
it seems like it would be a good fit for Grand Marais from my perspective, but I don't know if you've seen it.
Well, I think it would be. I'm just wondering if we want to still put limitations on it, though, as a conditional use, instead of,
Through the conditional use permit?
because, yeah, you just don't, I think a lot of neighbors would have issues with us saying you can have any kind of work in your home, and that's your neighbor. We have to
Yeah, so
think about it a lot more.
Yeah, so the zoning district though could be specific about what those uses could be, so that you wouldn't need a conditional use for that. I mean, not that you wouldn't do a conditional use, and I think a lot of cities do home occupations as conditional uses. But another way to do it would be to just identify up front, these are the uses that are allowed without a conditional use. And if there's some standards that need to be applied specifically related to that, maybe they could be identified as well. And part of the reason I'm bringing that up is we actually just finished a rewrite of a zoning code in Wisconsin where the state changed the laws to say that conditional uses could only be used if they had clear standards, and I'm paraphrasing, but they had to be clear standards and measurable and related to the use, and to the point where the city we were working with almost got rid of all conditional uses and instead identified all the standards up front, so that whatever people were trying to do, if something needed to be clarified, they tried to just identify the standards instead of trying to do it during a review with the planning commission, and things can sometimes get more subjective during that process. So that's just something to think about.
Well, right now, there are issues that the state of Minnesota is trying to force certain standards into separate counties and districts, and I think that's wrong.
For what? For what kind of
Well,
development?
They're trying to get a reclassification of vacation rentals to
Oh, right.
increase the taxes, and I think it's
Right.
a bad idea. The taxes
Yeah.
are an issue in Cook County.
Yeah, so do you see, Mike, do you see that coming into this
No,
effort?
no,
Because right now you don't allow lodging in R1 or R2, right?
right.
Okay. That's what I thought. So, without oversimplifying things, does this table or the table prior, anything that you have concerns about? That we should relook at a little bit?
I have no problem with that. I defer to Mike, of course. The thing about what we're discussing is he's gonna have to handle all the administration part of all this. So we gotta consider some things and some things we shouldn't do.
Which part are you looking at, Stacy?
The multiplex, large and setbacks. I'm just wondering how that's going to go over. I'm anticipating reactions. So I'm still not there yet. I'm working on it.
What are your concerns?
Well, I don't think this is gonna happen, but, one after another on a block, and I'm just wondering.
Like, there will be too many of them?
Yes.
And what are your concerns
In
about
one
that?
area, and then it just doesn't look like it fits in, and
Like
you
it's
know,
too
a
big?
10-foot setback, and then you have another one, and then I don't know. That's the part where I know we need it. Will it happen? I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's my, but I'm working through that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, this is still a time where if there's something about that you particularly don't want to see, we can add regulations to prevent. So, and you know, if that hasn't occurred yet, what that is, we still have time for that
Right.
to occur.
I'm still.
And we still have time for folks to bring it up for us. But that's the kind of feedback I'm hoping for, is, okay, if that does get built the way we're going to allow it, this in particular I don't like. And then we can try to make sure that that in particular doesn't happen.
And I think it's my concern of seeing one after another. And I don't know that we really can control that, or should.
No, I mean, our age-old strategy that we never, write down in the code is the market will never actually create that situation, so we don't have to deal with it. But since we're talking about such a drastic change, I think it's worth considering it might happen, even if we don't think
Mhm.
it's going to. And what about it would be a problem? So other controls that are on it, other than the setbacks and the lot width and other things, we still have parking regulations. So they still have to provide off-street parking, and it's based on the number of units. So the idea that an 18-unit multiplex could fit on a 75-foot lot it seems like quite an architectural challenge to me.
That was, was
Well,
trying to draw a little
especially with the
thing.
limit of
How's
the
this gonna
height.
work?
Yeah, I mean, it's
I mean,
gonna
that-
have to be a cube, right? And it's gonna have to be right to the setbacks, and it's gonna have to be right to the 35 feet to have 3 stories. And they still have to provide off-street parking for all those units. It would be hard to replicate that on a block at the minimum scale that this allows. So even though we're saying this is the lot width that's the minimum, it seems much more likely to me that it would have to be a bigger piece of property. Because we're talking about almost every piece of property we have is dealing with slope and other terrain issues. We're basically taking these off the table as the limiting factor, but there are still other limiting factors out there. I mean, how big are the apartment buildings?
Mm-hmm.
18 unit, it's about right for those,
Yeah.
I think. And you could certainly have more of those on that block. There's room for quite a few more, but not 10, right? When you
Right.
have all the parking also and all the off storage and everything else, and could you have 4 or 5 or maybe even 6, but not one every 75 feet.
Okay, yeah, because we still have those other things
Yeah.
you need.
But it's a good thing to think about. What should we look at next, Jeff?
Yeah, let's see. The other types of standards, so, I mean, just so I understand that conversation a little bit, you haven't had a new apartment building in some time, is that right?
Decades for sure. Yeah, when was the last time we built one?
45
Right, is
or
that-
50 years ago.
Yeah.
The reason being that the cost of the construction with all the regulations and setbacks and what are prohibitive of building a rental apartment.
Right, and.
We've only got
To go
one,
back to,
one big one on, out by the distributing thing, a big tin building that was moved in here. That's all rentals. That's the only one that comes to my mind. I converted a rental unit, 6 units, into low-priced condominiums, and it was very successful.
where is that?
On
Located?
Fifth Avenue,
Fifth Avenue?
yeah, right across from the little care center for children there.
Yeah, about
Okay.
4th Street.
Yeah, yeah. It was a
Okay.
building I bought, and then I came to the city planning, and they denied me, and I later came back, and the city council approved it because it was for low-income housing. The
Even that
units
was
were
25 years ago.
Not that long.
Yeah, that long.
Yeah.
Yeah, that long. But the last time we built an apartment had to be the 80s, didn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I bet, yeah.
Well, the one
Yeah.
condominium we've got was built in 80. I believe.
Yeah.
And that's been very successful. There's waiting lists
Well,
for,
Birchwood was
there's waiting lists to get into
90s, I am. I think
the
so.
co-op on Second Street,
Yeah. That was
and there's
90s.
waiting lists on this condominium here in town. But that water is one water for the whole building. Ed Cave built that building, and I financed it. Been very successful. It's the only one that was built because after that, the city planning and zoning required 1 acre per unit for a condominium, which was, we don't want any business. We don't want development. And there's been quite a bit of that in the history of Grand Marais, that we're anti-developing. And that's gonna change, because there's more younger people moving up here, different people with different diversities and talent. There's one sitting right over there, and there are changes taking place, whether we like it or not. We do have a bunch of people that say, well, I grew up here, I don't want this, I don't want that. And we can't go back to 1940.
Well, and we identified up front that one of the issues is that anything over 2 units requires a conditional use permit, even in the R2 district. The setbacks are, the side setbacks, which we've been talking about, are 25 feet today there, and then 40 feet in front. So, you know, that's eating up a lot of land if you start to draw that box of 40 on the front, 40 on the back, 25 on the sides.
That's correct.
That's eating up a lot of developable land. So, all right, well, the other standards we wanted to talk about that might help with some of your concerns, Stacy, are so some additional building design standards could be having standards that require building entrances oriented to the streets. And if you think about, I think most of the apartment buildings I've seen and think of in Grand Marais, they primarily orient entrances to the interior of the block or the parking. So, you know, these buildings seems like they weren't built to fit into neighborhoods like houses are built. And they're separating the units from the street, which is different from houses as well. So, you know, the code can have standards that say, you know, apartment buildings should face the streets just like houses do. And the parking's, put behind, and they can look as nice as houses can look. So I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but the examples I'm thinking of in Grand Marais don't fit this at all. Articulation of building walls. So I think sometimes people get concerned that there's just going to be this big wall, long wall of a building that doesn't fit in with houses. But if we can set up standards that prevent those walls from getting too long and too flat, and you don't want to do too much with that because that can add to the cost also if you go wild with it. And then some cities have exterior building material regulations so that you get more attractive buildings. Again, you don't want to go wild with that because that can add to the cost of building the building then too.
So would those design standards be for those larger buildings? We're not going to tell you what to put on your house or articulate the exterior of your house or something.
We
I
already
hope
have design standards downtown.
Right.
Right.
That talk about the articulation of a front wall when it's wider than 50 feet.
Okay.
So
So that's where we would go.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's not a lot of single-family homes that have to deal with that.
Right.
And there are some that are that big, but they don't have a 50-foot wall necessarily. And if they did, maybe we do want to regulate them a little bit. What we're not doing is saying how you have to articulate it in any specificity, so you can do it in simple ways. I'm just looking out the window, looking at the Best Western, and you can see that big wall of their addition. And it's got brick and then siding and then brick. And it's just a little bit of separation between them, and it breaks it up just enough so that wall doesn't appear to be this. It actually brings the scale down quite a bit just to separate it like that. And that would meet our requirements.
Okay.
So you think about a big sixplex, and if it's only 50 feet wide in the front, then it's still probably 2 units wide in the front, and it's going to be broken up a little bit that way, just so you can see the separation. And if it's bigger than that, then maybe we care. But I think we can probably just borrow from what
We are currently
downtown.
saying? Okay.
Yeah. Now, some of the other requirements downtown don't apply. We want transparent front walls, and we want them to be right on the property line because we're trying to make it also pedestrian oriented. And in the residential neighborhoods, I think pedestrian orientation can mean something a little bit different. Like we want to have a yard and
Right.
stuff
Okay.
like that. Now, what about building materials?
Okay, give me an example. What are you talking about?
That's a very controversial subject.
I think so.
And
Yeah,
I
throw an
think
example out there, Jeff.
We're a small town, I don't think we should go there.
Yeah, so, we've had this on the boards, some of the presentations that we did last fall. I could try to pull those up, but I think we can just talk about it simply that a lot of times people will want, of course, people typically like brick, stone, they don't like metal, they don't like vinyl. That's oversimplifying it. It would be saying, a lot of times it's trying to give developers the list of things that the city definitely likes, and then identifies things that they definitely prohibit, but then there's flexibility in between there or similar materials. So some cities just steer clear of it though. So
It's been a lot of
I
court
think
cases, there's been a lot
I
of
think the
court
government-
cases on
go
that
ahead.
issue. And it's very, very controversial to tell people what color their house is gonna be.
Yeah, I
Kind of infringes on the freedom.
would shy away from that one, just my first reaction.
Me too.
You have to give me more examples of why we need to think about that, I guess.
I can't.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon, that cities draw the line at that level. But, you know, we recently worked with a city where I would have guessed that that's where they were at as well. And then as we got into it and talked about it, they said, actually, we want to do that in this part of the city or that part of the city. In that case, I would say it was non-residential, mixed-use areas. The only place I think you would maybe consider it is with some of the larger buildings maybe, but I'd say it's more typical in non-residential areas.
Well, in the Cedar Grove Park, we have a design committee that has to approve the buildings. I'm on it, and we do look at the buildings, and if there are objections, then we voice them. But we haven't had any problems with it.
You haven't said no to anybody yet, have you?
Yeah.
I mean, have you said that design won't work? Or asked somebody to change their building design?
Well, it would. That,
I mean, we've got metal-clad pole buildings up there,
I know,
right?
we do. The Baptist church, for one thing, some people in the early stages that complained about that and what that. So then we created a design review committee.
Okay.
And Mary Somnus runs that now.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that building. Well, should we talk about site design standards?
Yeah. Yeah, so the things that we've identified so far is screening of outdoor parking, trash storage, other storage areas, utility structures, landscaping buffers between different scale buildings. So, you know, an example would be, I think Stacy, you were talking about the large multiplexes. If a large multiplex is going to be, you know, adjacent to a house or a duplex or even a smaller cottage houses or something, you know, there could be a standard that says that they need to do some landscaping along that edge, and maybe the side yard setback is a little bit bigger, not a lot bigger, but big enough to fit that landscaping that's required. That's an example. There could be standards for trees in the front of the street yards. Those are kind of the basics. And those are, you know, screening for parking, storage, trash storage, those are all separate, you know, they could be separate things. And the parking thing would be related to larger buildings, probably not, you know, not single family. Maybe you don't apply it to duplexes at all, or the courtyard housing at all. You could draw the line. But I think with all these, you could draw the line at, you know, small multiplex or large multiplex. I don't know if you'd even have to do it with row houses if you got them, because they end up looking like houses pretty much.
So when you say trees in front or street yards, we're talking about, we're gonna tell you how many trees you can have in your front yard?
That's what we're
Or-
talking about, like how many you have to have.
It'd be a minimum, so it'd be a minimum of one, you know, one per, what I've typically seen is one per 40 feet or 25 feet of lot width, that sort of thing. And again, that could, you wouldn't necessarily have to apply it to single family homes.
It's gonna be
Could be more
that
of
large
a larger
development
lot
again,
thing.
where somebody's coming in and they're a developer and you've got some design criteria that you want them to follow. It's not what most of the things that we're gonna be dealing with look like.
So on the block where Grand Marais Apartments and the, what do you call the ones below? How many trees are on that?
Harborview?
Harborview Apartments, yeah. How many trees on that
Not
block?
a whole lot. And a lot of the ones that are there were planted by the city's tree board, not the developers.
I'm not, Do we have to tell them to put trees up? I don't know.
We don't have to, no. That's a question, do you want
No.
to?
I don't. I guess I don't really want to tell anybody they have to put a tree up. I hope they want to put a tree up, but do I want to tell them they have to? I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, so one thing that could help, so you're saying that block with the 2 apartment buildings doesn't have many trees?
It looks to me like they pretty much plowed it all under and then put the buildings on it.
And they have put some, yeah, because there are a couple on the side and behind by the upper level, there's some, is it popple, birch? I don't even know.
Yeah, there's some
Gro-
screening up
Yeah,
there.
but,
And then on Broadway, there's a row of some trees that were planted
yeah,
10 years ago, 15 years ago, but not when they were constructed.
right.
Trees are tricky. They're very controversial.
Yeah, and we work with cities that don't have landscaping standards sometimes when we start to work with them, and sometimes they don't add them, but then other cities have, as Mike probably knows, have extensive landscaping standards. And in between there's two cities we recently worked with, they really wanted landscaping standards, especially like surrounding parking lots. So again, that's probably not a residential thing, but it could be for an apartment building, because that is one way to have it fit in the neighborhood better, is if there's trees, buffering that parking lot, or even the scale of the building will look better if there's trees in front of it.
Right.
The city of
So-
Minneapolis has a tree ordinance on the boulevards of the older buildings, which are very prevalent. They were, of course, a victim of the elm disease, so they did require a certain amount of sugar maples and different trees to be replaced. So they do have an ordinance regulating trees.
I do kind of like the landscaping buffers between different scale building types. But I guess I don't know what that really means.
Okay.
I like the idea of
We'll add
that.
some detail to it for you to look at.
Yeah,
The problem with that is there's so much difference in different neighborhoods in the city. They're totally different in one area and different in another area, so.
Well, I think the idea of site design standards probably makes sense for the larger scale on the list. And so whatever we come up with, we'll limit to those.
That's what that's where my head goes when I'm thinking about this. I'm not really worried about
Yeah.
the smaller things.
And that's where
It's-
most of the action's gonna occur
Yeah,
afterwards too. And one of our goals is to make this really understandable for people, and so they know how to follow it, which the less restrictions or requirements you have, the easier it is to understand. So I think that for the smaller buildings, we don't need to do a lot of that stuff.
okay.
When
yeah.
we're talking about the bigger buildings though, and they've got big parking lots, and they have to deal with trash from multiple units, and they've got all kinds of other things going on, that is probably worth screening from the neighbors if it's gonna be
Right.
infill on an existing residential lot. So, I don't think it's likely to happen very much, but if it does, we
But
wanna
we want to be ready for
yeah.
it. Yes, I agree.
yeah, that makes sense to me too. The thought about this missing middle housing is that, when you go up to duplex or courtyard houses or even the small multiplex row houses, that they are still generally the scale of houses. We're not increasing heights, building heights that are allowed, we're staying at the 35. And, if you're getting smaller lot widths, those buildings, in theory, they should, in the examples that we've seen, that they're not totally out of scale with houses. It's when you get to the larger ones where, they're bigger than a house for sure. So you probably want to do some extra things with screening and buffering and.
Okay, so I'm thinking now, the Joins property, and clear cutting that and putting up row houses there. Ooh, that might be a problem, so maybe we do need some trees. I'm thinking out loud here.
Yeah,
So I'm just trying to anticipate the resistance we might get.
Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe for some things, we do want to have, to think about that.
Well, it's
I
gonna
don't
be a question of priorities again.
Right.
When you look at that lot, and each square foot can only be used for yard, or tree, or screening, or parking, or housing, and housing's the one
Right.
we're focusing on right now. I mean, a
And,
lot
you
of
know,
those
and-
trees that are along the roadway are actually in the right of way, so they can't cut them down to make room for their development. They're not on their property.
Oh, okay.
But
I
that's
didn't know
just
that.
along the right of way.
Yeah.
You know, the interior of it, there's a lot of trees in there that could be removed and likely would be.
Well, it probably would, but.
That's a
and-
controversial subject, and proof is the 2 elm trees that were taken down for the Highway 61 project. There, people were protesting that.
But also, if somebody's developing a lot like that, they want to sell those lots. They're going to try their best, I would guess, to make them attractive.
Yes.
Keeping established trees if you can. I don't know.
It's not clear whether that's whether that's what a developer would do.
Right?
You know, their key consideration is gonna be keeping their cost of construction down so that they can sell them for a reasonable price, the price that somebody will buy them for.
That's right.
If they're talking about multiple units on a lot. If they're talking about higher end units that they want to sell for more money, then
Right.
sure, they'll be a lot more concerned about landscaping, but that's not really what these rules are setting them up for. Well, what's left?
Yep. Oh,
yeah, so, yeah, it seems like those larger types would be, I mean, what do you think? They'd be the courtyard apartment, or apartments, it'd be multiplex large, row house large, probably because if you had, for a large row house building, you'd have 5 minimum, 5 times, say 20 is 100 feet long.
Yeah.
That's getting big, right?
yes.
The row house small you could include in there, but if that's up to 4, you're up to, maybe 75, 80 feet. You could include that because, that's wider than a house.
Yeah, I don't know about row houses being,
I'm not so worried about the small row house.
No.
2 to 4 units, 18-foot minimum, that's what we're talking about? Or are we
Yeah.
going to the 24?
well, that's minimum. They might build them
Right.
30 feet wide.
That's right.
So it might be that we have the standard based on building width rather than
Then,
use.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Before that, you said, what's next, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the timeline. So the plan was to meet in person at the beginning of April. I think it's the 1st. And the plan was to talk about ADUs, courtyard housing, mobile home parks, and tiny houses.
Right.
And then as we're getting, I mean, before that, I think we can come back with with standards for the ones we've been talking about, so that we're getting, we're building the standards as we go. So we're targeting some draft standards by May. Now, I don't know, are you gonna, well, Mike, we can talk offline about
Yeah,
meetings.
I think we'll have to. At this point,
Yeah,
I'm not sure we're gonna have a public meeting in the first week of April.
I don't think so.
right.
It seems likely we won't, so.
Public meeting, a planning commission meeting or something bigger?
Well, particularly the kind we're talking about, and here we are today, and a couple of our folks aren't here, and I think they're not here because of what's going on in the society. And we
Right.
can't, I mean, we have to have them here to conduct business, particularly new business where we haven't gotten into it much yet. So I think we'll have
Right.
to kind of collect their thoughts on this, and we'll have to get back to everybody on what the schedule's gonna look like. But I'd say
Yeah.
this will probably back us up a couple of weeks at least.
Well, this
Maybe
is
more.
too serious a project to rush it, so I think we should
Yeah.
look very carefully at what we're recommending. Because there's all kinds of different neighborhoods in the city of Grand Marais, very mixed use.
Well, I had wanted
Well-
to rush it, but I think we better put the brakes on now.
Well, we're still
for a
gonna
few
move as
weeks.
quickly as we reasonably can. And our goal was to have these regulations ready for folks to use this construction season.
Yeah.
And
We
Yeah.
can
I
make
don't think
that.
that's,
not,
I
you
don't
know,
think
we
we
won't
can.
be ready day one. No question, it's gonna be, we're gonna miss that. But can we still be ready for this summer? I think so. But it's gonna depend now on
yeah.
how this unfolds. If some cities we've seen are basically closing up shop until the end of April. And if they're right about how
Mhm.
long this is gonna last, then we should plan on this taking a month longer than we expected it to. And if not, great, we'll see you sometime in April and we'll let you know.
Yeah, so, Mike, we can talk about that too. I mean, I don't know if there's a way, if you don't close out, if the planning commission could meet virtually where we do something, like this, but people are individually, looking at the same information and we can, we have go-to meeting technology and that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah, we'll talk to folks about their ability to
And we have the
connect.
master communications guy there, right, Patrick?
We do, if, but the last thing we want to do is have Patrick go visit everybody personally and set up
Set
their
up their
computer.
computer?
That kind of defeats the purpose of the remote meeting in the first place. So we'll check in with folks
Yeah.
and see what their capabilities are and see what our choices are for doing
Yeah,
something like that.
Right. Okay. That being said, I feel like we've gotten a lot of good information and we can move forward on kind of drafting how it actually starts to look like in the code,
Mhm.
which I think is, in some ways that's the tricky part is we're not touching all the zoning districts, so we have to figure out how we make this fit in the current code without rewriting the whole code.
That's correct.
Yeah, so we have, you guys have been, I feel like you've been pretty decisive on the direction so far, so we can keep moving it at least in that direction. I don't think we should talk about community engagement today,
No,
unless you do, Mike, well, I don't know, we could check in on what Patrick and I worked on when I was there, I guess, if that's something that can move further, if that has to wait also.
I think people are kind of overwhelmed right now.
yeah, I don't think we want to add to the noise at the moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's
Okay.
better just, let's wait a couple of weeks, see what happens.
Yep, I get it.
Because we definitely want people to have some space in their mind to be able to deal with
Mhm.
this.
Yeah. So this is what we had for next step. So, we can, the work that we've done for the other housing types, our goal would be to try to do that for these other 4 types by April, whether we meet or not. We'll have that ready. And then, we go into, again, the standards, the code actually getting updated. So what definitions and standards, how do they look when they actually go into the code? And then we're not gonna do the online survey, it sounds like right now. The next thing we were going to do is to start to show some of these properties, some of these housing types on some example lots, not specific lots, but like some illustrative lots. So, Mike, I think you and I were gonna try to figure that out.
Yeah. So we'll pick spots in town that exist, but we won't show spots in town. We just want to say, okay, these types of conditions exist in town. This type of housing would be allowed under this regulation. Here's what it would look like in this type of situation.
So we'll show what the new housing types might look like next to existing housing. And then get reactions to those.
And they'll be beautiful, so we'll just only get positive reactions, I'm sure.
Oh, good. I can't wait.
That's supposed to be the fun part, right? Being able to look at some things. So that all makes sense
Yep.
Yep.
All right.
in spite of chaos in our world?
Well, we'll look to you to come back with some recommendations.
Yeah.
to
Definitely,
consider.
yeah. No, I'm serious. I feel like you guys have been decisive at the last meeting and, well, actually the previous two meetings and this meeting with the direction you want to go. So, yeah, I mean, we're not going to spend a lot of time on exterior materials and we'll focus on the things that you guys think are important. And we have the information for the other things that we can bring back and say, this is what those examples were. And if there's something that resonates with you, we can pull that out, but otherwise we won't go down directions that you're not interested in.
All right. Ready to
Good.
go?
All right,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you. Stay safe.